Hello, welcome to Fluffy Pigeon Art. My name is Christine, and today I'm going to be painting Wisteria. I have this leftover palette from Wisteria that I've painted in the past. You can see some examples. I have this one and this one, and they're all a little different. So I'm just going to paint a version of Wisteria that comes to me in this moment. You'll notice that I try and avoid making the wisteria too rounded. I like them to have more like skinny curved petals, so that's kind of where I'm going to start. I think today what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do one of these with just the branches around it. So we'll start with maybe that floral part of the wisteria, that petal part here, and then build up the branches and curvy vines around it. So I'm going to start with so you'll notice my palette. This palette is from Sylvan Clayworks. This brush is from King Art. I have some watercolor soluble crayons I may or may not use. And then my palette is filled with Daniel Smith paints. So, all right, so what I'm going to do is with my wisteria, I'm actually going to start with what I call a J scoop. So a little bit of a J and another one, only going the opposite direction. And you'll see that the bottom of the petal is a little bit bigger than the top of the petal. So they are pretty symmetrical, these flowers. The shape, or I should say where the angle points tends to change based on where it's located on the vine. So I'm just gonna start with this. This is a wisteria color actually. This is Daniel Smith's Wisteria. These set of petals are going to curve because the vine is going to curve. It's going to kind of go this way. You'll notice that the ratio of water to pigment changes from petal to petal. That's just my style. I'm not super precious when it comes to that stuff. I more go with the vibe rather than just this is the proper way of doing it. So I hope that doesn't bother you or you don't mind. And then up here, I'm gonna start to move the direction of where the petals are going. So they're gonna not start to point just down. They're gonna start to turn and point to the top. So I like to call the top my heart petals. So you can kind of see they're making little hearts. And then I'm gonna add some pink to this. That generally going to put them in the top, and then I might add a little bit of yellow. So I actually have wisteria in my garden, and they grow in May in the northern hemisphere. They are a fairly invasive flower, meaning that they have a habit of taking over a space. So once they start, it's hard to get rid of them. I actually have wisteria behind me that goes as high as, I would say, 20 feet above a house behind us. So they're pretty crazy. I'm gonna just move some of this pigment around, just kind of spread it. And then what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna grab some green. On my palette, I've got a little bit of this yellow green left. I'm gonna grab some of this yellow, and I'm gonna grab some of this green. I'm just gonna mix it together and we'll work with that. But I'm gonna try and keep my brush small, or at least my pointy brush small, so that I can do this vine in between. So there is always a little bit of petal buds on the bottom, ready to bloom into something else. These leaves down here are pretty close, so I'm gonna connect them. This is kind of how they look. You'll see as I kind of come up, the green spreads in the petal because it's still pretty wet. And sometimes that's good and sometimes it's not so good. And then up here, just kind of go that way and then that way. Okay. Now, wisteria is actually pretty skinny. It's not as wide as I think some think it is, because when you see them out in nature, you see them from a distance and it just looks like there's so many. There's just a lot of these, so it looks like clusters, but they're not as wide as grapes. So, okay, so I'm gonna take this guy, I'm gonna curve him up to about there. And then I'm gonna take and create a couple of viney, leafy sections. Notice they have a lot of movement. Down here. And then these vines are gonna have leaves on them. So skinny, scoopy leaves. And honestly, it's the leaves that kind of take over the area more than the petals do. I am continuing to remake this color because I did not have it prepared for this YouTube tutorial, but that's okay. I'm moving quickly. You do not have to move quickly because I am just, sometimes there is a looseness that is achieved best when you move fast, but that's a personal preference. I have kids and lots of pets, and so I don't always have the luxury of taking my time. So I'm just moving quickly on some of these. Excuse me. You'll see that some of them are dark, and that's just because I'm not super careful about my ratios all the time. I will intentionally go back and play with lights and darks in these to add just more visual interest. So you'll see I'm sometimes going back and adding more pigment to certain spots. I'm gonna have this guy curl up, I think, and just keep, and then I'm just gonna let it go like that, because you'll find that with a lot of these, they're still vining around. So I'm actually gonna drag this one out too and create this little vine. So all these little curly swirlies, that is real, that does exist. They are super fun to look at that way. Just gonna add a little bit more there. And maybe one more here. It's gonna start another vine, kind of like that. Okay, so now I'm gonna add a little bit darker pigment to these vines. And I do that once again for interest. And because watercolor tends to dry super light, it's important to have just a little bit of extra pigment. Now you can choose to wait on this and let it dry fully. I don't know. Sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't. I often don't, let's be honest. I often do not wait. It's funny, I work with middle schoolers and I have all the patience in the world with them. I do not have all the patience in the world for myself. Isn't that funny? And then what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use these watercolor soluble crayons to just add a little bit of pop to some of these guys. Now what you can do is you can like add a little color vibe to it, like you're just kind of coloring in a colored paper, and just leave it like that and just let it be and just be like, oh, look at that mixed media, isn't that cool? Or you can put that on and then blend it out with the previous watercolor, because it's water soluble, so that means it can be activated by water. And you can blend that in a little bit. And then you can go back on top and then add these colors if you, again, if you just want it to pop up a little bit more. And if I don't like how painterly it looks or how colored it looks, you can just add water and spread it around. Sometimes I really do like the, it looks like I just colored on top vibe. But that's it. So I'm so glad you joined me. This is just one way to paint wisteria. As you can see, I have many ways, but this is one simple way that you can start your adventure into painting wisteria. And I hope that you do so, and I hope that this helped. And have a great day.